Good morning, everyone, and you're very welcome to the Hill of Uisneach Phase 2 Conservation Management Plan, a work in progress presentation. I'm Joanne Hughes. I'm an archaeologist working for Archaeological Management Solutions, and we are currently engaged by Westmeath County Council on the development of Phase 2 of the Conservation Management Plan for the Hill of Uisneach. And the presentation today is intended to show you the processes involved in the creation of the Conservation Management Plan and to show you how that plan will be used going forward. There's two parts to this presentation. The first by myself for AMS, and the second part is by Ian Douglas of Flynn Fernie Environmental Consultants. They're the ecologists who are working on the Conservation Management Plan at Uisneach at the moment. So what I'm going to do in just a minute is turn off this video so you'll be able to see lots of the aerial images that we took as part of the project to date, and I'll turn on again at the end just to say good luck and goodbye. So what you're looking at here is a great aerial image of Loch Lou, one of the principal features on the summit of the Hill of Uisneach, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a few. So firstly, let's take a quick look at what a conservation management plan is and why there's a need for a conservation management plan for the Hill of Uisneach. Now, we all know that there are places dotted around this country that are really rich in culture and heritage, and these are places where archaeological sites and monuments survive, and which often serve as a focal point for tradition, for folklore, for mythology. And we know, sometimes almost instinctively, that these were important places throughout history and prehistory. Now, these elements have often, in much changed and much modified form, come down to us through time, and they remain as significant spiritual, cultural and inspirational places to the present day. And what a conservation management plan is supposed to be and to do is to be a main guiding document for the protection and for the conservation and for the management of these significant heritage places. Now, in the creation of the Conservation Management Plan, we really have to acknowledge and respect the landowners as the caretakers of these significant heritage places, because it's through their care for the land, as their predecessors have done, that the continuation of culture and traditions associated with these places has survived. So the plans aspire to help inform the decision-making process for the protection, for the conservation and the management, and for the future development of these places on all of our behalves, so that the cultural wealth of these places is fully documented and understood, and so that it survives for our descendants into the 21st century and beyond. And so when we talk about special places, there are some that are real standouts within the island of Ireland, and the Hill of Uisneach is one of those. So geologically, the Hill of Uisneach is a rare survival in the Midlands. It's part of an upland karst landscape that wasn't really impacted by the last glaciation. It stands at about 180 metres above sea level, and it's one of a number of distinctive hills in the area that include Knockast, Carn, Kildare and Freewin Hill. And just like at the Hill of Tara, the summit of Uisneach is a broad plateau on which many of the archaeological monuments are located. Now, there's also a number of really interesting geological features on the broad hilltop, including some dolines or sinkholes and wells, and these are typical of this sort of karst geological landscape. But probably the most well-known feature associated with the Hill of Uisneach is a notable geological one. It's the famed Cat Stone, which is a massive glacial erratic on the western slope of the hill. Now, the name erratic comes from the Latin word erar, which means to wander, and these rocks are different to the predominant bedrock type where they're found or where they lie. These erratics were transported by glacial ice, often over hundreds of kilometres, and they can provide us with great detail of the past environments. For example, they can tell us about the paths of the ice flow and the routes that glaciers took. But from an archaeological point of view, and here I have to acknowledge the work of Dr. Roseanne Schott and the stakeholder group for the development of the Phase 1 part of the Conservation Management Plan, and from which the following detail is summarised. We know of at least 35 monuments. Most of them are located on the broad hilltop at Uisneach, and more than 20 of them can be seen. That is, they're surviving above ground. The others survive in some form below ground, and these have been identified through analysis of aerial images, through site work, and through the relatively recent geophysical survey work of Dr. Roseanne Schott of NUIG. But as techniques for identifying archaeological sites are becoming more and more sophisticated, it's likely that more new sites could be identified through this type of non-invasive or no-digging survey at Uisneach in the future, like a LiDAR survey. So the archaeological sites that we do know about at Uisneach range in date from the Neolithic or the New Stone Age period, about 4,000 years ago, right the way through to the medieval period. They include different types of burial monuments and enclosures, standing stones, ring forts, souterrains or underground passages and chambers, and an embanked roadway. And if you'd like to get further detail on these sites, you can go to www.archaeology.ie, and in the Historic Environment Viewer you can find details for many of the known archaeological sites, not just at Uisneach, but right across the country. Now, as well as the archaeological monuments, there's a wide variety of structures and buildings and other features dotted around the Hill of Uisneach, many of which are related to the continued agricultural use of the hill from the early medieval period up to the present day. And people have been interested in the archaeology of Uisneach since at least the early 19th century. And there were even a series of archaeological excavations on some of the more prominent, in fact 9 monuments on the hill in the early 20th century by R.A.S. McAllister and by the naturalist Robert Prager. All of the monuments were restored after the excavations. There's still a lot of questions to be answered about the archaeology of Uisneach. Similarly, the history of the site is both complex and compelling, with sources relating to the hill surviving from the 7th century. The sources inform us about the territorial significance of Uisneach and Meath, which extended right across County Westmeath, parts of Longford and Offaly, and eventually across the lands of modern County Meath by the 10th century, reflecting the power and the prominence of the kings of Meath through time. This territory was sometimes referred to as the 5th province of Ireland. So Uisneach was a royal site associated with the dynasties of the Southern Uisneach, who are included in the 12th century list of the Uisneach, the kings of Uisneach. Like the Ogonacht kings of Cashel in Munster, whose ceremonial seat was at the Rock of Cashel, Uisneach was probably the ceremonial seat of the Southern Uisneach kings, who would have presided over assemblies during the early medieval period, one of these being Bealtaine in May. The mythology and folklore associated with the site tells of the tradition for the tribes of the 5 provinces of Ireland to have met at Uisneach, in the centre of the island, and legend tells of Uisneach as the place where this world and the other world collide. Stories survive of the god Lu, who was reputedly killed and buried at Uisneach at one of the Bealtaine assemblies, and of the great sun god, the Dagda, who had a house on Uisneach, at the epicentre of the cosmos, from which he could see equally in all directions. The Druid mead is associated with the lighting of the earliest fire at Uisneach. It was a place of gathering for druids and for significant persons in mythology. And central to all of that was our glacial erratic, the catstone, a physical marker representing the central point of Ireland, once referred to as the umbilicus hiberniae, or the navel, and it was possibly the focus of a cult of the centre, a cult found in ancient belief systems worldwide. And so that sense of Uisneach being a significant place has survived with us to the present day, with people from all over the world, as evidenced by the spiritual leader of the Sioux Nation leading a gathering at Uisneach to mark the summer solstice of 2001. Uisneach then, as the ceremonial seat and inauguration place of the Kings of Uisneach, is recognised as one of the 5 major provincial royal sites of Ireland, which collectively formed part of a national bid in 2010 for inclusion on the UNESCO World Heritage Status tentative list, which recognises the special significance of each of these places from a cultural heritage perspective. The tentative list is reviewed and redrawn in each country, and 2021 will see the next tentative list being created, and our conservation management plan will feed directly into that potential renewed bid by the 5 provincial royal sites for nomination once again for tentative list for World Heritage status. In terms of the process of preparing for this bid, it takes approximately 2 years to prepare all of the documentation that's required, and a public consultation phase is a major part of this process. Following that phase of work, there's about a 1.5 year long inscription process by the World Heritage Committee, including an assessment of the bid by the Ecological Council to see whether or not all of the requirements for inclusion have been addressed. So it's important to stress that this is not a process that is entered into lightly, but the benefits of World Heritage status, as illustrated in the case of the Boyne Valley and the Skelligs, show that the potential benefits of inclusion are not inconsiderable from an economic and from a social perspective. The requirements for inclusion on World Heritage tentative list include demonstrating that there is an outstanding universal value to the proposed site. And in the case of the collective royal sites of Ireland, the department at that time in 2010 determined that this could be shown in the well-preserved cultural continuity and large-scale Iron Age complexes that survive in the 5 sites. They've shown that these sites were clearly part of a much wider landscape which feature many known ritual sites, and that each of the royal sites occupies strategic and elevated positions within their landscapes. There's strong mythology and folklore associated with each of the sites, and they remain as strong symbolic and spiritual centres of Irish culture and identity. In terms of their authenticity, the royal sites are well represented in historical sources, medieval manuscripts, and in academic literature, with many of their original attributes surviving intact within their equally intact pastoral landscapes. A number of investigations have been archaeologically conducted which attest to their integrity, and there is continued ritual use of some of these sites, with reference to events and rituals with mythological and historical associations. In terms of comparisons with other similar sites or bids from Europe, there are no other Iron Age ritual and assembly sites like those represented in the 5 royal sites of Ireland currently inscribed on the World Heritage List, although sites of Iron Age ritual and assembly do exist across Europe. So armed with all of this information and knowing that the creation of a conservation management plan is an integral part of the process for the World Heritage status bid, as well as being a worthwhile venture in its own right, what guidelines are in place to steer the creation of the conservation management plan for Uisneach? Well, we're very fortunate that the requirements and process for developing a conservation management plan are very clearly set out in the Australia ICOMOS Charter for Places of Cultural Significance 2013, or the Borough Charter, to give it its more common name. And as shown, this charter in practical terms sets out a standard of practice for advisors and for any stakeholders who make decisions about or who carry out works at these culturally significant places. It's a 3-step process, and as you've probably deduced, our work on phase 2 of the Conservation Management Plan for Uisneach is the 2nd step of that process. The first step of setting out the cultural significance of Uisneach has already been done in the phase 1 Conservation Management Plan, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. and now we're involved in the phase 2 process, which again I'll talk a little bit more about in just a few minutes. The third step will involve the implementation of policies and objectives that are being developed as part of our work in phase 2. But we're also very fortunate in that there is further overarching guidance in terms of the policies and objectives of the Westmeath County Development Plan, which also aim to protect, promote and enhance the significant cultural heritage identified at the Hill of Uisneach. And this is not just from an archaeological heritage perspective, but it also takes into account the magnificent views and vistas and the wider landscape setting of the archaeological complex. The development plan is complemented by others, such as the Heritage Plan, produced by the Heritage Officer. Now, the consultation phase for the draft development plan to cover the period 2021 to 2027 closed in June 2020, but contained in the draft were a swathe of measures designed for the protection and enhancement of the Hill of Uisneach. For example, one of the policy objectives for the new development plan, as shown here, is to support the promotion of Uisneach as one of the Royal Sites of Ireland. Another specific objective is to continue to support the growth of cultural tourism by facilitating heritage events, festivals and infrastructure, an objective which clearly directly relates to current events and practices at Uisneach. Many of you watching this video today will already be familiar with the concept of sustainable tourism, which can be defined as that which meets the need of present tourists and host regions, while protecting and enhancing opportunities for the future. It is envisaged as leading to management of all resources in such a way that economic, social and aesthetic needs can be fulfilled while managing to keep hold of its cultural integrity, its essential ecological processes, biological diversity, and all life support systems. And this sustainable tourism principle is clearly at the core of the development of tourism at the site and in the vicinity of Uisneach to date. That desire for sustainability and sensitivity has been shown by the landowners at Uisneach in their commissioning of a planning status and development appraisal and a feasibility study for the Hill of Uisneach in 2014. It has been bolstered by a more recent Lough Valley Community Development Study in 2018, which looks at the tourism potential and the development potential for the wider area based on the growing number of visitors to the area since 2012 or 2013. And at the core of this study was public consultation, which clearly outlines the community's perceptions and wishes for their area, in line with the tourism development of the Hill of Uisneach. So what is that tourism potential? Clearly the hill holds a great attraction for a growing number of people who value it in many different ways, from cultural heritage, that being the archaeological and built heritage, the mythology, the folklore, but also for its natural heritage, for the landscape, for the views, for its spiritual values, for their childhood memories, and the list goes on. From a tourism potential perspective, we know that Uisneach is an important site within Ireland's hidden heartlands and Ireland's ancient East, and it's viewed strategically in tourism terms as a gateway for visitors coming from the southwest of Ireland towards the Boyne Valley. So immediately we see the potential for increasing visitor numbers to the site with marketing and promotion, etc. In terms of current visitor access, because the hill is also a working farm, it's only possible to visit the site strictly and understandably by guided tour, which allows for safe access to the site in a controlled way in collaboration with the landowner. A dedicated tour guiding company was established in 2013 to facilitate this working arrangement, and the success of that venture is seen in the number of visitors increased at Uisneach between 2013 and 2019, where there was about 18,000 people access the site in this way. Of that 18,000 number of visitors to Uisneach in 2019, between about 6,000 and 8,000 of those were present at the Hill of Uisneach for the lighting of the Bealtaine fire in early May. This is now an annual event. It commemorates the mythological lighting of the summer fire by the Celtic druid Mead, and is now a modern tradition in its own right. So you can see that striving to achieve a balance between cultural heritage, between tourism, farming, conservation and management is therefore one of the key requirements that the Conservation Management Plan will address. So what has happened to date regarding the Conservation Management Plan? Well, I've already mentioned a number of times that the first phase of the Borough Charter process has been completed. In 2016, under the direction of Dr. Roseanne Schott, the cultural significance of the hill was assessed and was set out in the Phase 1 Conservation Management Plan report. This report clearly outlines the significance of the hill and its environs in space and time. It allows for an increased awareness of the cultural and natural heritage of Uisneach to be achieved. It illustrates and enhances the understanding of the many and diverse values that are attributed to the place, and it will form the basis of our Phase 2 Conservation Management Plan as our process goes on. So what we are now in the process of doing is building on that Phase 1 report with the intention of addressing the balance between tourist access and organised events on the hill with the management of the sensitive archaeological heritage on working farmland. No easy task. Another important task that is in process is conducting a condition survey of the recorded monuments on the hill, and this will act as a baseline survey against which any future changes to the sites and monuments can be measured going forward. We've already undertaken a drone survey at the hill, and many of the images that are included in this presentation are from that survey, and we'll complete that process later on this month. We also have a public consultation strategy underway at present, and as with the Lochna Valley Community Development Study, we believe it's vital that as many people as possible should be allowed the opportunity to have their say, and which will feed directly into the development of policies for Uisneach going forward. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a minute. So out of all of this work, which incidentally is guided by a stakeholder steering group, it's been conducted in an effort to, as far as possible, identify all of the key vulnerabilities that exist for Uisneach and to develop policies which will allow for the safeguarding, for the protection and for the conservation of Uisneach going forward. In terms of the stakeholder group for the project, in conjunction with the Heritage Officer of Westmeath County Council earlier on this year, a stakeholder group for the project was established, with the initial online, thanks to COVID, meeting taking place early on in the project. There's been 3 stakeholder meetings to date, and they're really useful opportunities to gain specialist insights from each of the organisations involved. And it would be remiss of me not to mention here some of the key stakeholders, which include the landowners at Uisneach, and also Allen Hill Tourism, who was integral in the development of the previously mentioned Sustainable Tourism Development Plans for Uisneach in 2014 and 2018. And so we'll continue with our stakeholder meetings throughout the remaining duration of the project, and we always welcome the advice and experience that they bring to the table and that they offer so freely. So back in June, when the lockdown restrictions began first to be eased, and on the hottest days of the year, we were on the Hill of Uisneach undertaking the drone flight for the condition survey at the site. Seeing the preliminary results from this survey has certainly added another dimension and perspective to the project, with the almost parched grassland offering up new views of known monuments and suggesting new ways to look at these archaeological features. The image you see here gives a great indication of the expansive views from the highest point of Uisneach across the Midlands and towards the northwest of the country. And as previously mentioned, our public consultation strategy is live at the moment, and it will be until the 25th of August 2020. The questionnaire that we developed is designed to assess public perceptions of the cultural heritage significance and other values that people associate with the hill. And it allows an opportunity for interested persons to have their say in the development of those policies for the conservation and management of the hill going forward. And as set out in the Borough Charter, all of the work that we've conducted in phase 2 so far is being undertaken in an effort to consider holistically and as far as possible all of the factors which affect Uisneach, from the needs and the requirements of the landowner to the physical condition of the hill and its associated monuments and features, as well as any other additional external constraints. So the Conservation Management Plan will set all of these out in accordance with the methodologies established in the Borough Charter and in accordance with the current statutory and non-statutory best practice plans and policies, and all in collaboration with the key stakeholders for the project. So what's left for us to do now is to collate all of the information that we've amassed and gathered to date, and we have to analyse all of the results that will come in from the public consultation at the end of August. September is going to be a busy month of writing, with the first draft of the plan to be submitted for review towards the end of the month. A period of editing and comments on the revised drafts will follow, and the final Conservation Management Plan will be submitted in October 2020, COVID allowing and all going well. So that's about it from me, other than to say a huge thanks to all of the people listed for their support and their assistance in the project so far. We look forward to the finished product, and we wish Uisneach and the Royal Sites of Ireland the best of luck for their World Heritage tentative list status in the coming year. So I'm going to hand you over now to Ian Douglas, the ecologist with Flynn Fernie, and Ian will tell you all about his work on the Conservation Management Plan and on their survey so far. So thank you.